title of my talk tonight is Contemporaries, people at the same time, prophets. There were three major prophets in the Bible, Old Testament, who all prophesied at the same time. Who were they? Three major prophets, all lived at the same time and all prophesied. Yes? Yes? No. It was Jeremiah. So Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Daniel all lived at the same time. Jeremiah, of course, was prophesying back in Israel while both Daniel and Ezekiel had been taken captive into Babylon, but two different captivities. What I want to do tonight is just sort of tie together some of these names, and it sort of makes you the Old Testament sort of fits together a bit better. To sort of realise that they were contemporaries of each other, prophesied and often affected by the same whatever's going on. So we're going to start off in the book. I just start off with one of his prophecies, and that's in Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 1 to 3. Ezekiel 14, verses 1 to 3. And then came certain of the elders of Israel unto me, and sat before me, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, these men have set up their idols in their heart, and put the stumbling block of their iniquity before their face. Should I be inquired of at all by them? So the Lord is saying, I know what's in their heart, and if they're going to dare to question me, I'm not interested. And then we're going to jump down to verse 14, where it mentions three other people. Though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, meaning the land of Israel, they should deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, saith the Lord God. Then he repeats it again with a little bit more in verse 20. Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, saith the Lord God, they shall deliver neither son nor daughter, they shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness. So one thing we know straight away is the one thing that these three men had in common, they were all righteous. So otherwise they would not have been put together. I just thought, now when you read that, Noah, Daniel, Job, you'd think if it was me doing this, I'd put it in the order that they lived. So I would have Noah, Job, and Daniel. But now they've got Noah, Daniel, and Job. So just so you've got some idea when these guys lived. So Noah, of course, way back, and he lived for 950 years. And from Bible chronology, he lived between 2892 BC to 1942 BC. The last few years of his life was in the time of Abraham. Abraham was already born before Noah died. So it's a big span there. So the next person on that list, in order that they appear, is Job. Now there's no great exact certainty when Job lived. What seems to really indicate possibly, it can only go possibly, is that he and all that you read that happened in the book of Job was while the children of Israel were captive in Egypt. Not that they started off captive, they moved down there willingly, and they moved down there around, where have I got it here somewhere? 1710 BC, when Jacob and the other children, Joseph had been there for a few years, but when Jacob moved down and when he was around 130 He lived the last 17 years of his life until he died at 147 were in the land of Egypt, and they moved down because of the famine. So, and then again, according to Bible chronology, and I'm not going to try and justify that now, I'll just say that's how it is, that the Exodus was 1495, 115 years, 215 years later from when Jacob moved down. So Job was then, so God wasn't dealing with the children of Israel as he did later. They were all tied up in Egypt, and Job, we think, lived over towards where Babylon was. And it was the area that's known as the wise men, the region naturally where the wise men came from at the time of the birth of Jesus, from what they, alongside Babylon. So just trying to get a few hints on when Job lived. But in Job, if you want to look at it, by all means, in Job chapter 1, was the time when everything went belly up for poor old Job and everything went wrong. And just in verse 14, there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were ploughing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants to the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped. So just talking about these people, the Sabaeans, they were ancient Arab type tribe, and they lived in what we now call Saudi Arabia. And then it goes on and talks about the disaster there with the whatever that was, the wind and all that. We just jumped to verse 17 where it mentions the Chaldeans. Now the Chaldeans lived over towards Babylon. And then we know jump in chapter 2 and verse 11, I'm just trying to establish when Job lived. What we do know there is that it lists 3 of his so-called friends, comforters, well, they weren't much comfort, were they? It just says in Job 2 verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite. It appears as though this was a person who lived in a city called Teman, T-M-A-N, and it was part of Edom, the country of Edom. Now, going back to when Jacob was born, his brother, of course, was Esau. So I dare say what you might say we've established here, that this is well after all Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is down the track a bit, not well after, but this guy Eliphaz was connected to Esau, and then Bildad the Shuhite. Now, the thought is that there was a son of Abraham by his 3rd wife, Keturah, the 6th son of Abraham. He was called Shua, or maybe Bildad was connected to him. The last one, the Zophar, so far so good, Zophar, the Naamathite. Now, I haven't really got anything definite. We have, of course, Naaman is the closest thing, but he was Assyrian, so it wasn't a doom, that was years later. So maybe there was some place called Naaman, but in that region is where Job lived, and obviously there were a time after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then later on, the Bible switches to totally concentrate on the 12 tribes as they come out of Egypt under Moses. So the thought of the book of Job fits in there when God was dealing with Job, who was a very godly man, and so on. So let's just jump to Jeremiah, one of the prophets I'm mentioning tonight, Jeremiah chapter 1.
This one.
Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 1. And the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests that were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin. Now he was not a Benjamite, he was of the tribe of Levi, because he was a priest. So he was both a priest and a prophet. You talk about, I mentioned priests and prophets and kings. Poor old Jeremiah had to deal with a lot of kings, and only one of them good, and that was Josiah. And he caught the sort of the end of the reign of Josiah, and then he went into Josiah's sons, who were all bad, and an extra grandson who was also bad, and the last one being Zedekiah. So anyhow, let's go to verse 2. To whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah. Now, here's at that particular time. So Josiah was only 8 when he came to the throne, and he only lived for 39 years. So at this particular point, when Jeremiah starts prophesying, he's 22 years old. Again, it's only a bit of a guess, but everything indicates that Jeremiah was still a teenager. And he was maybe about 5 years younger, and Jeremiah, or 6 years younger, he could have been around 16 or 17 when he started prophesying. And that he started his ministry there as a prophet in 626 BC, and it lasted for exactly 40 years, because in 586 BC was when Zedekiah was taken captive. And then again, as we know, 40 is a big Bible number. So I go on back to verse 2, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign, which was 626 BC. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, under the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, under the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. So that's Jeremiah, just a young man, and he starts his prophecy, as I said, right at that time when Josiah was still alive, and he got the last few good years of Josiah. Then everything went bad after that. Well, let's jump to Ezekiel. We go to Ezekiel chapter 1. So I'm talking about all these guys that were sort of connected. And we'll look at down. We had in the original thing it was Noah, Noah, Daniel, and Job. We'll go to Daniel a little bit later. So Ezekiel chapter 1. Now came to pass in the 30th year. A little bit of a debate what the 30th year was referring to, but the common belief is that it was referring to his own age in his 30th year, when he would have then been 25 years old when this happened. He was, I'll keep reading. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were open and I saw visions of God. And in the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity. Now again, we can actually, because of that verse, we can pinpoint this pretty well accurately, because we know exactly when, from Bible chronology, when Jehoiachin was taken captive. So there was a Jehoahaz and a Jehoiachin, and both of them only reigned for a few months. And then the ones that reigned quite a long time at that time was Jehoiakim, who was a very nasty king, and he gave Jeremiah a hard time. He reigned for 11 years. And then the last one, Zedekiah, he also reigned for 11 years. So verse 2 pins the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity as 592 BC, which was actually just 6 years before the final total destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. So the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest. So again, we've got, obviously if he's a priest, he's also of the tribe of Levi, and he's also a prophet. He's a priest and a prophet. It says the son of boozy. He obviously had an alcohol problem. In the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was upon him. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, and a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the colour of amber, out of the midst of the fire. And in this amazing chapter, a lot of people have latched on to chapter 1 and 2 and so on, said he had visions of flying saucers, and because it talks about wheels within wheels, and it's actually the throne of God. When we think of the throne, we think of just a person sitting on a chair. But the throne of God is far bigger than that. And when you go through the whole chapter, you find out that it fills the whole heavens, and that above all the things that Ezekiel records, there was a chair and there was a throne and there was God sitting on it. So that's all what chapter 1's about. The heavens. It happened to others. Isaiah records something like that. Of course, Book of Revelation records that. In chapter 4 of Revelation, they all saw basically the same thing. Although by the time you get to the Book of Revelation, things have been added to that, and it talks about the 4 and 20 elders, which are not mentioned before. It's all like God goes on building this great throne of God, we might call it. So without going into all that, we just talked about Ezekiel being there. Now, just jump to 2 Chronicles and chapter 35. And we'll talk about the death of Josiah when he was only 39 years old. By the way, he only ever made one mistake, and that killed him. So it never ever records that Josiah ever did anything wrong other than his final decision. And we'll just pick it up though in 2 Chronicles and chapter 35. Just there in verse 20, 35 verse 20. And after this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, it's almost like Josiah just got everything sorted out right at that particular time. When you go through his life, and they were in paganism, and he got rid of all the idols, got rid of all the evil people, and he just finished that, and then it was like that was his job. And it just says Necho, king of Egypt, came to fight against. It says against, it's mostly possibly should have been at. Carchemish is a place by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. And this is the time of the Assyrians. And he sent ambassadors to him, saying, "What have I," this is Necho, the Pharaoh, "what have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee this day, but against the house wherein I have war. For God commanded me to make haste and to forbear thee from meddling with God, forbear thee from meddling with God, who is with me, that he destroy thee not." Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him. I suppose you see it a little bit from Josiah. You can't just pass through my country. You can't just go from Egypt, through Israel up to Carchemish, which is up near Assyria, up near in that region. He said, "You're not going to do that." Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him, and hearken not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God. And what Necho had said, by the way, was right. And you think, well, he's a pagan ruler. Why should I listen to him? I don't know what Josiah was thinking. And came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And the archer shot at King Josiah. And the king said to his servants, that's King Josiah, "Have me away, for I am sore wounded." And his servants therefore took him out of the chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had. I think, what do they mean by a second chariot? I guess it was there for such a reason. There was something happened to the first chariot, there was the second one. Who knows? Maybe like a medic following along, certainly how it worked out. And they put him in the second chariot, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died and was buried in one of the sepulchres of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. You know, when some of the kings died, they were so glad that they died because they were so horrible. But when Josiah died, everybody mourned for that. And of course, in particular, Jeremiah. So verse 25 just starts off by saying Jeremiah lamented for Josiah. So let's go to the book of Daniel, talk about the other guy. Daniel chapter 1. So again, because of it gives a hint at what time we're talking about, we can work out when verse 1 was, because it talks about the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. So Jehoahaz had only reigned for 3 months, and then Jehoiakim came in, and then later on he fell into trouble with Nebuchadnezzar. But right now it's in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, who was one of the sons of Josiah. Not the eldest, you'd think it would be the eldest, but I won't go into that, we'll say one of the sons. So the date there in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim was 604 BC. And Nebuchadnezzar being co-regent with his father Nabopolassar. Now Nabopolassar had started the Babylonian Empire in 609 BC. But Nebuchadnezzar was his general at the time, and in 604 BC, Nabopolassar finally died. And Nebuchadnezzar then became king in his own right. And when we know the big metallic emblem of the head of gold and chest of brass and so on, we know there that when Daniel interpreted that vision, he said to Nebuchadnezzar, not only, it wasn't just the Babylonian kingdom, but Nebuchadnezzar personally was the beginning of what we call the 7 times punishment, the 2,520. And Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, thou art the head of gold. So the top of the head of the image, the very top, was Nebuchadnezzar when he became king in his own right in 604 BC. So that's why we date that prophecy from 604 BC. Let's start verse 1 again. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels unto the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children. You look up the Hebrew word for children there, it doesn't mean mostly a little child, it means a youth. Now, all these 4 young men could all speak for themselves. So I'm guessing they were late teens, most probably sort of age. He's got the word children there. And of the king's seed and of the princes, verse 4, children in whom was no blemish, but well favoured and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science. So they're not just little kids, are they? And such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, and it names them in their Jewish names, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But later on we seem to forget Daniel's Babylonian name, which was Belteshazzar, but we somehow or other always refer to the others by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So that's who they're talking about. So Daniel is just a young lad when he starts prophesying. Jeremiah looks like Ezekiel was about 25 when he started prophesying. Now, Daniel was taken captive in this particular time, as it obviously was, in 604 BC, around that time, when Nebuchadnezzar came down. But Ezekiel was not taken captive until the end of the reign of Jehoiakim in 597 BC. So it's actually 2 different captivities that they ended up being prisoners in the land of Babylon. And when you read through the book of Ezekiel, this huge, big prophecy book, you realize that it's mostly not a prophet of a teenager. is of an adult male when he writes. Let's go to the book of Daniel, chapter 9 this time. Daniel chapter 9 verse 2, in the first year of the reign of his reign, that's referring to Darius, the king of the Medes. Now, history doesn't record this particular man. It records 3 Daniels, but not this Daniel. So the 3 Daniels that it does record were all of Persia, whereas the Darius that you read about in the early part of the conquest of the Persians over Babylon, he was from Media, and the early part of the kingdom was known as the Medo-Persian kingdom. But history doesn't record that much. It mainly just talks about the Persian Empire, because eventually in the prophecy of the fact that of the animal that was on its side, how it was not lopsided. Persia would become the greater power, and Media would eventually fade out. So this Darius, or Darius, however you like to say it, was the Mede. And then the other one, of course, it says, and the kings of Media, Darius, and Persia, that was Cyrus the Great. So Cyrus the Great this all happened in 539 BC. The Babylonian kingdom had lasted exactly 70 years, just like the prophets had all said. So finishing off verse 2, it says, I, Daniel, stood... I think I've jumped to another part. Sorry about that. Am I still in Daniel 9 verse 2? Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at another part I got on the page. I'll go back to that and I'll read it again. In the first year of the reign of Darius, the Mede, I, Daniel, understood by books, the number of years whereof the word of the Lord came unto Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Well, the dates there are 609 BC to 539 BC. 609 BC, at the Battle of Carchemish, Nabopolassar had defeated the Assyrians. And then, as I said, a few years later, Nebuchadnezzar, his son, became the king. And then we got a few kings of Babylon, right through to Belshazzar, who was again maybe a co-regent, but I won't go into that. And we have a great detail on that with the writing on the finger on the wall, weighed in the balance and found wanting, and all, and the fall of Babylon in 539 BC. Now go back to chapter 8 of Daniel, which is I sort of started reading a bit, and this is the prophecy of the rise of the the Persian Empire, and then eventually the Greek Empire. And just in Daniel chapter 8 and verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media, and that is Darius the Mede, and Persia, Cyrus the Great. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. So it actually jumps to the Greek Empire. So I don't know whether anybody back then sort of worked it out. So we've got Babylon's gone. We're now at the very beginning of the Persian Empire, but it already mentions the Greek Empire, which was a couple of hundred years away. So whether they realize it one day, that I think of the last king of Persia was Darius or Darius III. He was the last one. And he went to battle with Alexander the Great. And if he'd known this, he mostly would have worked out that I'm a goner, because this prophecy clearly lays down that the Persians were going to be beaten by the Greeks. I'll go to verse 21 again. The rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Guess who that was? Alexander the Great. And now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms. And they were the 4 generals of, because he died very young. And maybe Alexander maybe only got to 30 or 32 or something. He died he was only maybe 20 when he started the campaign in 334 BC, when he crossed what they call the Hellespont, Dardanelles, Gallipoli, that region there, and he invaded a country we now call Turkey, and he started to push the Persians back. And the king at that time, the last king of Persia, was this guy Darius III. And everything was against. I'll digress for a second. Oh, I nearly should finish in a minute. Everything was against Alexander being able to beat this big empire. But as we know, because the Lord was in it, it happened. Anyhow, the four generals of four kingdoms of verse 22 is the Ptolemies, the Antigonus, Antipater, and the Seleucid. So they were I won't go into the details. Let's go to chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10. In the third year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, which would be 536 BC, by the way, because he came to power in 539, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the thing was true, but the time appointed was long. And he understood the thing and had understanding of visions. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth, neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks was fulfilled. He's a very godly man, Daniel, wasn't he? And the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel, which is actually the Tigris. Okay, the word Tigris is not in the Bible. Euphrates is, but not Tigris. And it's Hiddekel, they believe, was the Tigris River. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with the gold of Uphaz, and his body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes were as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in colour to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. We know from time to time, and I won't get you to turn to these because I'll just read them out, that others had a similar vision of the Lord. I dare say that's who we're talking about. So you can write the scriptures down, but you don't need to turn to them. So I'm going to now quote from Ezekiel back to chapter 1, where in verse 26, Ezekiel said, and above the firmament there was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, and as the appearance of sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man upon it. And I saw as colour of amber, as the appearance of fire, round about within it. From the appearance of his loins even upward, from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw it, was the appearance of fire, and it had brightness around about it. Then I'm going to jump to chapter 8 now, verse 2. Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his loins even downward, fire, from his loins even upward, as the appearance of brightness, as the colour of amber. Then I'm jumping to the New Testament, to the Mount of Transfiguration, in Matthew 17, verse 2. And he was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. In Mark chapter 9, verse 3, Mark, recording the same events, describes it similar, a little bit different. And his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller of earth can white them. And then finally in Revelation chapter 1, this time with John, in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with the garments down to his foot, and girded about his paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hair was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes was a flame of fire, and his feet like unto brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and a voice as the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shining in his strength. So just saying, the same vision has happened to others, and very similar description. I might just jump ahead a little bit. Oh no, anybody in a hurry? Got another 5 minutes? Okay, Daniel chapter 10, again, if you want to turn to, I think we're already in chapter 10, aren't we? Down to verse 12 of Daniel 10. Then he said unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. The most unusual story, this. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. Yet the vision is for many days. Then jump down to verse 20. Then said he, knowest thou whereof I am come unto thee? And now I will return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia will come, referring to Alexander. And I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael, our prince. So exactly what all that means, I'm not sure. You're sort of trying to picture the Lord, whoever this is, fighting against, and as though, it's a little hard to understand. I'm going to finish in Revelation chapter 12. And for those that went to the leadership camp, they will remember that Pastor Ben Smith, some of you know him, Pastor Ben Smith gave a talk, and he mentioned Revelation chapter 12. Now, on Wednesday night, this last Wednesday, we went to a meeting up at Gawler, and he gave another talk there. And again, he quoted, I don't know if he knows any other part of the Bible, but he quoted Revelation chapter 12 yet again. And he made an interesting point. Now, we read there, back there in Daniel, about we call him an archangel, Michael, sort of working with the Lord and all that. And here we see the same guy, Michael, a few hundred years later, is mentioned in Revelation chapter 12. And Pastor Ben said something I've never heard anybody say before, but I think it's a very good idea. He mentioned that he believes that this took place at the time that Jesus died on the cross, was buried for 3 days, and then rose again from the dead. Now, he got no proof that that's when it was, but it adds up that possibly would have been when this happened, when the Lord achieved total victory, and the devil, you might say, bruised his heel, and that Jesus crushed his head, and that his old, you remember in the opening chapter of the book of Job, where the devil seemed to have access in and out, talking to God and all that. Possibly that all stopped when Jesus rose from the dead in particular and triumphed over death and hell. So Pastor Ben's thought was from verse 7 in Revelation chapter 12, and there was a war in heaven. It seems like Michael likes to get involved in wars, doesn't it? There was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. Now, in case you're wondering who this is talking about, it really lays it out in absolute detail in verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, going back to the Garden of Eden, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation. And Pastor Ben, I thought, he just said, well, when was that? It was when Jesus rose from the dead. It wasn't till then. So it's an interesting thought. I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And we'll finish with verse 11. Great verse. And they overcame him, the devil and his kingdom, by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. So I guess so my whole thought tonight is that all of these prophets and priests and books all overlap and intertwine. They all back each other up. Talk about when Ezekiel talked about Noah and Daniel and Job, it ties all those people together. And then we get right through to here. where total victory and in all God's dealings with man, that is the full story. And all the people said, Amen.
Interesting information.